Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another session of Monk Chat here at Empty Cloud Monastery with the resident monks. So to my left, there's Aya Soma, and to my further left, we have Bhante Sumita, so our resident senior. And tonight we'll be speaking about Buddhism. So any questions you have which are related to Buddhism or Buddhist practice in any way, you're welcome to go ahead and type them in and we'll answer as best we can. So welcome to everyone who's joining in. So Roy, Geeta, Rick, Kauser Friend, Alex, Sam, Kumu, and Herhel. Gurgle, Herhel?
I say Hurkel, but you can tell us what actually the right pronunciation is.
Yeah, I've been saying Gurgel this whole time.
Is that Italian?
I think Spanish, Sigilio. Yeah. And you saw a little funny creature that was on the back. That was not a rat. That was Stan the cat.
And hello also to Angela, who was here as a resident recently, and Bobby. So, and we have our first question from Bobby.
And the question is, I'm assuming that the possibility of aliens is high. Is it possible to be reborn as an alien? And would an alien species be considered part of the human realm? Very good question, Bobby. And I'll pass it on to Bhante Sumita.
It depends on how you define aliens. Like people today, they also define like immigrants as aliens, right? The same fellow human beings you can call, if they are from a different country or different continent, you might call them aliens. Or even the same people like in your country, you might call them aliens too, right? So actually it is true, like it depends on how you define. Like maybe the animals can be alien to us, and people who are not familiar to us can be alien to us. So we definitely can be born as aliens in that sense too. So according to Buddhist cosmology, anyone can be born as anyone in any of these realms. Maybe in the Brahma realm, maybe in the celestial realm, maybe in the human realm, or maybe even in the hell realm, depending on our own karma. So we can be born as any of the alien or whatever you call it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and similarly, if somebody is born on another planet, then if they're born with a body and mind that resembles an animal, then we would say that they're part of the animal realm. If they have a body and mind that resembles a human, then we would say they're part of the human realm. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm a legal alien in this country, so actually both of us are legal aliens here, so we're still part of the human realm.
Legal
Also,
aliens, illegal aliens.
And from the perspective of beings on other planets, we're the aliens.
Oh. Yeah, that's true. Great. And Patricia, we discovered, is Brazilian in Ireland. Okay, great. So now we have two Europeans doing an all-nighter for Monk Chat that we know of. Good to see also Jessica and Tara. And Rick asks, due to having chronic illness, I retired early and live on a limited income. How do we determine what level of the four requisites are skillful in meeting our needs for food, clothing, shelter, and medicine? Ante, do you want to share some words?
Yeah, so the idea is, what's your basic minimum? So what's the minimum that you need to get by and be reasonably healthy? So we don't need luxuries, but you do want to make sure that you're not depriving yourself. So if you're trying to live on eating nothing but rice, well, that might be simple and it might lead to contentment, but it will also lead to the hospital sooner or later. So you do need to have some variety in your diet to keep you healthy. Similarly, clothing, you need sufficient clothing for summer and winter and so on. Sufficient shelter, sufficient medicine. What you don't need is luxury. So that's where we draw the line, is between sufficiency and luxury. So that's what I would encourage you to contemplate. What's the line between sufficient and luxurious?
Thank you, Bante. And Casey says, we're born onto another planet, beam me up. And Patricia asks, in regards to Buddhist practice, what are the disadvantages, if any, of being born as a woman? None. Yeah, what are the disadvantages? Absolutely none. I mean, actually, the disadvantages are no different than being a man, in the way that, like, these days we don't have a Buddha that is alive and well, that we can ask questions directly to. So there's also some Dhamma present besides the Dhamma, as opposed to when a Buddha is there, he's only preaching the Dhamma, the true, the handful of leaves that we need in order to go to reach full awakening. But these days there is a bunch of Dhamma present that also has a bunch of ideas on shares some wrong views on having a female body, but a body is just a body. So, as to quote the Bhikkhuni Soma, not this Bhikkhuni Soma, but the one from whom I get my name, who was an arhat at the time of the Buddha, in the Bhikkhuni Samyutta, and when Mara fundamentally tells her that there are disadvantages in practicing as a female monastic or as a female practitioner, she just turns around and she's like, what is that nonsense? One who thinks I'm a woman or I'm a man or I'm anything at all, then creates the conditions to be addressed by Mara. So creates an impediment towards awakening. So yeah, I think we're a little bit too fixated with bodies in general, with a lot of things, but bodies is one of them. So in regards to Buddhist practice, absolutely not. Casey says, simple yet unnourished, we cannot get arrested, etc. Diffidence better sufficiently and luxury. How timely, and thank you so much.
That was in reference to my answer to their question about four requisites.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
And Michael says, recently I've been getting into political ideological arguments. I realized that I should let go of the attachment to my views. How might one go through life without any views or opinions? Bhante Sumita?
In Sigalo Sutta, Buddha says, Chanda dosa bhaya moha ayodhammang ativatati nihiyati thasayaso kalapakkeva chandima. If someone is occupied, overwhelmed with chanda, the desire, and dosa, the anger, moha, the ignorance, and bhaya, the fear, wherever you are, at your place of work, at your home, everywhere, if you are overwhelmed with these four factors, this can lead you to downhill. Your good name, good fame can go down, decline. Just like the moon in the declining moon. What do you call Bhante?
The waning moon?
Waning moon. And the other one is full moon?
Waxing moon.
Waxing moon.
Yeah.
Yes, and if someone is not actually overwhelmed with these four injustices, then your name, your fame, your good name, image can really improve, just like the full moon. Chanda dosa bhaya moha yodammang nati vattati apurati thassa yaso sukha pakkeva chandima. So we need to feel this thing really every time when we speak to people, in maybe when we are occupied with arguments, and it can happen to us because of our desire, because of our fear, because of our ignorance, and because of our anger. So any of these factors can be really contributory to your arguments. Remember, if you are overwhelmed with these things, you will be in trouble. So even it can happen like family, family members can have arguments. You are carried away by these factors, then you are not really giving the right judgment to people. You are not really partial. You are not really impartial. So always you will be partial and discriminatory against the other. So make sure you're not carried away by these defilements in your arguments. That will save your name and fame.
Thank you, Bante.
I would just add a brief comment to that. So you asked about going through life without views. Well, first off, I would say that our goal is not necessarily to relinquish all views, but rather to relinquish wrong view and cultivate right view. So relinquishing all views is what happens with full awakening. But up until that point, what we're doing is we're practicing relinquishing wrong view and developing right view.
Thank you, Venerables. And Kumo says, modern humans have a history of about approximately 2.5 million years on planet Earth. What do you think about existence of humans like us on other planets? Or do you think only this 7.3 billion exists? Anyone wants to take this question?
There's actually an interesting sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya where the Buddha says that there are 100,000 human worlds. And I don't take that as being the limit. I actually think that there's far, far beyond that. But the Buddha was just picking an extremely large number to try to communicate that this is not the only place where sentient beings exist. So he says there's 100,000 human worlds with 100,000 Deva realms above and 100,000 hell realms below. So he's just trying to communicate that we're not the only tiny isolated pocket of sentience in all reality, but rather that there are countless worlds with sentient beings, countless universes with sentient beings. We're not unique. Yeah, so it's not just the humans on this world. There's countless worlds.
Thank you, Venerable. And Jessica asks, in regards to politics, human rights, and protecting our environment, how can we care and help humanity, planet, but not get sucked into too far? What does Buddha say to these issues and being an empath? Well, first of all, I would say that a lot of times this is connected with wrong view. So we think that in order to be of benefit to humanity, we need to we have this kind of martyr syndrome that the only thing that we have to do is take care of different other people or other causes outside of ourselves, and then we get very much burnt out. So it's not that taking care of others is a bad thing in and of itself. It's actually very wholesome and compassionate. But if we haven't cultivated the strength of mind, the strength of heart to be able to, endure the suffering, we will just be very burnt out. We will drown into the suffering. So it's important actually to do a spiritual practice. It's not selfish, actually. It's quite the opposite. A lot of people sometimes, it's not true that a lot, but a few people that we've practiced with in the past had shared how they felt so selfish, for example, to come on retreat, or how they felt so selfish to do any type of Buddhist practice that wasn't going to actively do something such as feeding the homeless, or going and working for in a social activist sort of manner. But it was very interesting to see how their partners actually were feeling that the same way. So we have a friend who comes on retreat on a regular, or used to come on retreat on a regular basis prior to COVID. And her husband is not interested in Buddhist practice at all. But then as she was practicing, he was like, oh, please go. I'll take care of the kids and I will clean, do all the chores in the house all by myself. I'll do the laundry, whatever you think you need to be doing this weekend, please go. And then he saw us and he was like, yeah, thank you so much for helping my wife. And, this was an example, but we have multiple examples of that, of that being the case. And it's actually emblematic. It gives you a sense of how powerful this practice is, because actually you become a better person. And by being a better person, you have a really good impact on others. Another story that I'd like to share is what before Buddhist practice, I used to be, involved in different food activist projects. And I was the cliche angry activist. Ranting all the time, definitely on Facebook. I was ranting a lot, and doing a lot of actually good work also in real life. But I was depressed. I was upset by the state of the world and all the natural sort of disasters and how people were eating meat multiple times a day from factory farms and whatnot, and not knowing really where they were sourcing their food, all of those things. Very, very upsetting to me. And, in all those years that I was involved in all of that, I think I probably alienated maybe people from actually pursuing more sustainable choices rather than getting people involved in the cause. So the people that I was serving or helping were fundamentally people who were already on board, on the same page. But then we started the retreat center in Rockaway Beach, and it had nothing to do with, it had none of these labels, like it didn't have a vegan label, it didn't have a sustainability label, it didn't have any type of label. The only label it had was Dharma Center, it was Buddhism, Buddhist monks. So people would come. It was run, I was a layperson back then at the very beginning. So I was running it through the principles that I had learned. So everything was de facto. We would have a garden and grow the things and make food from the place. Everything was sustainably sourced. And as I say, we would vegan bomb people. So they would come and all the meals were vegan and they had no idea. And it was the first time. And it was so interesting because a lot of people transformed and shift their lives. Not because I was preaching them to do one thing or the other, but actually because my intention was to practice the teachings of the Buddha. And so I was coming to it with a mind of compassion, of care, instead of lecturing. And I was fundamentally, first and foremost, practicing what I was preaching, as well as everyone else. So it was mind-blowing how actually there was a lot of this that was kind of like a side effect of the Dharma, of the Dharma Center. And it taught me how, we should really focus on what we are doing. What are we doing with our lives? Nobody got inspired even to practice Buddhism by having people telling you, oh, you're all terrible. Like your samadhi is awful. Your compassion is awful. That's not, that wasn't my welcome when I went to a temple. I was welcomed by people who were actually practicing what they were preaching, and I was inspired. And I was like, oh, I want to be like Bhante Ji. I want to be like Bhante Ajahn Chandapalu. Like I want to be like Ashinottama, like all these monks that I was meeting in these temples. I want to be like Bhante Sudatsa actually when I met him. Yeah. Very inspiring in the way of how they were going about their lives. And it's still up to this day. I was like, I want to be like Bhante Sumita. So, that's why I'm very happy being in robes. But that's because they're all practicing the teachings of the Buddha, and they are then therefore inspiring to me. But they're not lecturing me in how I am supposed to behave. So these are, very long story short, not long story long. My answer to this question. And Alexis says, I'm returning to university and I'm worried about maintaining a practice. Any tips to resist the peer pressure of participating in things contrary to the Dhamma? Antisemita?
Mindfulness. Yeah, make sure you are mindful with whatever you do. You can't always meditate in the forest, in the solitude. You have to somehow, somewhere, go to the real life, real society, and there you have to apply your theory, right? If not, what is the point in practicing? You can, of course, consolidate your practice, definitely by practicing in solitude, and then you should know how to apply that theory when you go to the mainstream society. University is a wonderful place for you to see many different people, different cultures, different communities, how wonderful they are. That unity in diversity in the university, I really enjoy a lot too. So go there and meet those people, but all the time keep your practice and keep your mindfulness. I think it will always be helpful to you. Meditation is not only practicing silently. When you speak, when you walk, when you talk, when you work, everything, whatever you do, it should be a part of it. So the Buddha said in Satipatthana Sutta, Gate tite nisinne sutte jagarite sampajanakari hoti. When you walk, when you stand, when you sit, when you lie down, you have to be mindful. And also, asite pite kaite saite sampajanakari hoti. When you eat, when you drink, when you taste, you have to be mindful. Even uchara pasava kamme sampajanakari hoti. Even when you defecate or urinate, you also have to be careful. You have to be mindful. And these are really, really wonderful things. So don't worry, being able to go to the university, that's a great opportunity, and go ahead and practice with mindfulness. Good luck.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bhante. And Sam asks, what's Satya? How Satya Parami be practiced? Bhante Sudasa?
So Satya means truth or truthfulness. So Satya Parami, the perfection of truthfulness, it means first off not to tell lies, and also to avoid deceiving or tricking other people. And on a deeper level, it also means a commitment to learning the truth. So not just going on our pre-existing assumptions and opinions and ideas about reality, but actually trying to really learn what's true. So always questioning our assumptions and opinions and trying to figure out what the truth of the matter is. And as far as speaking truthfully to others, though, it's important to remember that the Buddha gave 5 factors of right speech, and truthfulness is only one of the 5. So make sure that you're also following the other 4. So the Buddha said to speak what is true, to speak at the right time, to speak what is beneficial, to speak gently, and to speak with a mind of loving kindness. So you can say something that's true, but it's at the wrong time, or it's not helpful, or you're saying it in a really harsh and unkind way, or you're saying it just to hurt the other person, and that's not wholesome. It might be true, but it's not wholesome. So the commitment to truthfulness must always be taken within the broader context of wisdom and compassion. Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bhante. And Patricia asks, as a householder, would being aware of the news be a part of the responsibility towards the dependents under our care? Well, I would say that the important thing is the intention. What is your intention in reading the news? Is it to waste some time to procrastinate, or is it to being compassionate, caring? Of course, if there's an incoming hurricane, it would be quite helpful to know especially if you have children, people who depend on you, so that then you can put the right precautions in place, so that they're not harmed, that you're not, driving in the middle of a place that is subject to flooding that could possibly endanger them. So that is something wholesome. But if you want to, if you're in a situation of distress and just want to space out and then read, about all the different types of weather and climate situations happening in every single place of the world, then that gets into not something that is particularly useful or beneficial. Also focusing on how Bhante Sumita calls them heartbreaking news. If we get into finding, usually if we consume a lot of news, the news that are shared are mostly like not particularly happy events that are happening all over the world. And it can give us a very narrow perspective of what is happening in the world. It just seems like this huge, massive disaster, when in reality, there is both massive disasters happening and also massive goodness. So actually being a monastic, for example, is an experiential practice of really seeing so much goodness in this world. Like, we don't have to open the news, read the news constantly. Like, we go on alms round. It is incredible to be showered by this generosity of strangers or friends, people we know, people we don't know, people who are just inspired to give by seeing the sign of a contemplative. And you're like, wow, there's miracles of generosity, of beauty, of kindness, of like everywhere, even outside quote unquote Buddhist circles, even outside, the safe space of the monastery. There's incredible beauty out there, but it's not really reported, not really read about as much as, all the, perhaps if you search in latest news of even monastics, like you'll probably read the news of the ones that, weren't particularly conducting themselves that well, but the majority actually are conducting themselves so well, but they're not newsworthy. So see what is your, kind of intention, how it affects your mind, and if you're having a better understanding of reality or actually a more narrow-minded reality.
I'm thinking of a news report on the good monks. It's like, newsflash, monk was really nice person for 60 years.
Yes.
It's like, well, okay.
Like Bhante Sumita. Monk has only been smiling since we met him. Monk never loses his patience.
Monk likes to meditate every day.
Yes.
I think like news, north, east, west, south, right? News. That's how the word was formed.
Interesting.
Yeah. So the gossip from all four corners come together, and they put together using all the psychology and all the temptation. So people are hypnotized, and they are tempted, and they are so much addicted to see them, and they get heartbroken. Actually, no news is good news. That is why it is said. So when you have more news, for example, certain social medias always promote like heartbreaking things. Like I was really wondering why people can show those beautiful things in the world. Like there are very wonderful people, like as Venerable mentioned about those wonderful practitioners. Maybe if someone is doing something good, if you can post those things in the social media, would be so nice, right? Maybe like if someone is fighting in the plane, they immediately take up the smartphone and record it and post it in the social media. What does it make like for other people to see that? And after all the hard work of the pilot and the cabin crew and all the nice people, everything will be put into trash, and only one person shouting or yelling will be so much highlighted, and then people will have phobia to go by the flights. Imagine. So all the accidents, all the murders, all the nasty things, they are really rare things actually. But when we see the news, it looks like the whole world is in fire. It's not like that. Why don't we change our attitude? Why don't we show the more positive attitudes in the news media, and then maybe people will have more positive attitude towards their own life. They will have happiness. They will have joy. They will have smile. Oh, so wonderful, so happy. Why do we always try to? I don't understand. Why do they have this tendency to promote and propagate those heartbreaking news?
Thank you so much, Bante. And Ben asks, some translate vedana as sensation, feeling, or experience, etc. Could you share your understanding of vedana within the context of vipassana meditation? What are we observing during jhana? Bante Sudasa?
Yeah, so with vedana, one of the practices that you can do is to recognize that the sensation itself is just information. So normally we react to sensations with desire, aversion, or ignorance, but that's extra. The sensation itself is just information. So when you touch something, you're receiving tactile information about its texture, its temperature, and so on. But that's not telling you, please hate me or please love me. It's just telling you how smooth it is, or how rough it is, or how hot it is, or how cold it is. And then you decide that you like it and you want more of it, or you dislike it and you want to stop touching it. That's something that you're adding to the information that's coming in. So through examining Vedana in this sense, you're trying to piece apart the raw sensory information from your reaction to that information. So this is one way of contemplating Vedana that can lead to wisdom. Recognizing that we don't need to react to sensory information, and that our automatic reactions are causing us a tremendous amount of dukkha. And that if we can stop doing those reactions, then we'll have a lot less dukkha. That's one way. As for observing Vedana during jhana, the main practice that we see recommended in the suttas is to observe impermanence. So in terms of vipassana practice you can do while in jhana, the suttas that talk about that mostly talk about perceiving impermanence. So perceiving the constantly shifting nature, the temporary and insubstantial nature of all the phenomena in each moment, which would include Vedana. But the kind of contemplation I was just talking about, separating the sensation from the reaction, that's not really relevant in jhana, because in jhana, the mind is not reacting. The mind has to have strong equanimity in order to be in jhana. So the reactive tendencies are already temporarily suspended, but they're suspended through concentration rather than through wisdom. So the contemplation of Vedana is an example of an insight practice that would be difficult to do in jhana because it requires a certain movement of mind. So those are my thoughts on your question.
Bante. And Anita asks, can you speak a little to the practice of mudita? Bante Sumita?
Mudita, if we take it alone, it's a different thing, but I think it should all put together as Brahma Vihara, along with the other factors. Metta is the infinite, immeasurable loving kindness towards all sentient beings, unconditional love towards all sentient beings without any barrier, without any discrimination to every sentient being. And when it comes to the karuna, that is paradukhe sati hadayang kampeti iti karuna. When somebody else is suffering, your heart should feel it. You should feel sorry for that person. That empathy, that compassion, it's really important that we need to have that. When somebody suffers, then you need to feel sorry, or we should also be ready to help such people. And mudita is actually a more challenging one. Easiest one is karuna. Among all the four Brahma Viharas, easiest one is karuna. It can naturally happen to people. Like when you see someone suffering, you normally, naturally, average people, maybe there are some extraordinary people, like you don't even feel that. But mostly, by far the large number of people, vast majority of people would feel sorry for that. But it is little bit more challenging when it comes to the people or whosoever that are more better off, like someone who is richer than you. If you can be happy to see that person, oh, how wonderful, that person has done so much hard work, and that person has done also some good karma in the past, maybe practiced a lot of generosity, and that's why he is doing well today. I should also do something good, and so that I can also be rich. Why don't we take that example and be happy? That is called actually bliss of happiness. Seeing the other people's happiness, you should be able to be happy yourself, which is more difficult because as humans we also have a very strong emotion called jealousy. Jealousy comes into play whenever we see such people, like someone is more educated, someone is more better looking, someone is more better like socially very popular or in sports or whatever. Like when you see, I'm not talking about like real superstars, but when you have someone closer to you, you always compare, oh, he's better than me, I'm not. So you have that inferiority complex in you, which is tormenting you, and then you also feel that kind of a jealousy towards that person. That in that sense, I think it is very important. I have a small mantra for you. If anyone has this, if you recognize it, actually, oh, I have jealousy in me, then you have to do one thing in Buddhist practice. As always we do, we keep our palms together, say sadhu, 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 then your jealousy will go away. This one is a really good thing. So if you can be more mudita, if you can have more mudita, your life will be really shining. And I remember William Wordsworth, a romantic poet actually. He said in one of his poems, I wandered lonely as the clouds there. He talks about how the nature, the daffodils, for example, they are dancing, fluttering and dancing in the breeze, and 10,000s I saw at a glance tossing their heads in sprightly dance. And also the lake, the waves were dancing, and the breeze also was singing, and so nice. You see these things and you are so happy. You don't have to really artificially organize any musical shows. You have entertainment right here in front of you. If you just open your eyes and look at the nature, such beautiful trees, those fauna and flora, and even listening to the breeze itself will be such a beautiful sweet music for you, and that way you can also be a part of it. That is called bliss in solitude. I really like that. I also felt like that also talks about this mudita, that sympathetic joy. When somebody else is happy, you don't want to run away from that. You be a part of it. You make it so close to your heart, and then you can be an equal shareholder of that wonderful happiness. So looking at the happiness of those devas and other celestial beings, we should also be so happy. And then looking at the people around us, how they have succeeded in their life, how they are better off. you always should follow their example, do something better, and then you can be a better person too. Equanimity, again, upekha, is a little bit more advanced, as Bhante Sudaso mentioned. In the jhanic level, it can be really a good way you can see.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bhante. And because our friend says, I've been having friendly conversations on Buddhism with skeptic-minded people. When asked why I believe in karma and rebirth over multiple lives, I can only answer faith in the teachings of the Buddha. To this group, this is not a satisfying answer. For me too, it'd be nice to have a better basis to explain when asked about this. Do you have any advice for me? Yes, actually. So being a former skeptic-minded person, actually, I wouldn't scrape the former, I'm still very skeptic-minded. Yeah, when I encountered the teachings of the Buddha, I was defining myself as agnostic. And since Buddhism was presented to me as a religion, I was approaching it as a religion. And by religion, normally we assume actually that every religion is kind of Judeo-Christian religion, so that there are certain dogmas being raised in Italy, at least Catholicism, that's how it's presented. So dogmas, truths that are unquestionable, and if you ask the questions, they will be answered. So it's kind of a bit of a waste of time to enter that kind of inquiry process. So either you have faith or you don't have faith. So since I didn't have faith in those dogmas, I couldn't prove them or disprove them. Hence, I became agnostic in Christianity. And fundamentally, basically became a scientific materialist and not bothered about it at all. And once again, once I encountered Buddhism, I heard karma and rebirth, and I thought, okay, there are probably these mystical things that I can't really prove or disprove, and it's just not something that I should bother. So yeah, I was not defining myself as Buddhist because I didn't have any faith in the Buddha at that time, and yeah, just practice whatever I was interested in. At a certain point, I went to this retreat, actually from Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi. That happened to be, a certain point, Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi gave an overview of the Buddhist path. And at that point, actually, I had studied a little bit of, this part of Buddhism, this other part, this other side, this other part. But I had never had really an overview of the path until that time, or at least like my mind hadn't been ready until that time to actually receive the full sort of path. And I saw how everything actually in Buddhism is, first and foremost, makes sense. It's logical. And the whole path didn't make any sense at all without karma and rebirth. Because if, the end of suffering, because if you only live once, well, then the end of suffering is death. What's the point? So I remember I had this moment of realization of how everything up until then, as I was practicing, made sense and was experienceable. But then it kind of there was these parts where I was, just deciding not to investigate, but that they were the base through which all of the system kind of was founded. So that led me also to investigate what it is that we actually have faith in. Where are our beliefs based upon? So we tend to think, for example, of secular things like YOLO, you only live once, in our culture, we think of it as a secular kind of neutral term, but it's actually a very religious term. It's actually based on Judeo-Christian religion. It's fundamentally anything, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, you only live once and then you go either to heaven and to hell. And in Catholicism, we also added purgatory just to spice things up. But essentially, that's where we get the you only live once. In other traditions, then instead, you live multiple lives. And in fact, I remember when we had started Buddhist Insights, a friend of mine who is Christian had never come to Buddhist Insights because we clearly have Buddhist monks. And it's clearly, Buddhist, like B word is there everywhere. But he was interested in meditation, so he went to a Goenka retreat. And a Goenka retreat is presented as a secular retreat, non-religious environment, which in fact it is. And he came out of that retreat, and I was talking to him, and he was horrified. He's like, "Oh, it was a horrible experience. I felt like I was brainwashed." And I was like, "Oh, why is that the case?" And it was like, "Oh yeah, the person kept on talking about karma and rebirth." And it occurred to me there, it was no different than YOLO. Because for Goenka being born in India, it was like, of course there is karma and rebirth. So first of all, let's question, where do we get our assumptions of where are we getting these things that we think are secular or neutral or scientific? Are they actually what they are, or are they assumptions? Are they things that we believe in because we've been presented with them in our sort of cultural upbringing? And then from there, also inquire, ask questions. So luckily, I was in a very, very auspicious situation where I was running an organization, I still am, where we invite senior monastics of different traditions. So I just kept on asking questions on karma and rebirth. But first and foremost, actually, from that retreat, I started defining myself as a Buddhist, because also, I have faith in that Russia exists. I've never been to Russia. I have faith that Pennsylvania exists. I've never been to Pennsylvania. I have faith, actually, that New Jersey existed. Before I came to New Jersey, I spent many years in New York City without ever crossing the bridge. And where did I get this confidence from, this faith from? By using maps, following directions. And yeah, I had faith that New Jersey was here, and in fact, I found it. I had faith that America was actually across the ocean, that if I took this plane from Europe, I would land in New York City, that I had only seen in some movies. And it happened. So by using certain things, by having, meeting certain results, we see that it actually is something reliable. So it's the same with the Buddhist teachings. The more we practice them, we more see that it's impossible to prove the Buddha wrong. And that this is not a kind of like, sort of dogmatic thing that we decide to believe in or not believe in, but we actually see, if we put these conditions in place, well, there is a cessation of suffering. So my mind just switched. Like, then we see cause and consequence with everything, but then we think that birth has no cause and death has no consequence. Like, there's like just an arbitrary beginning and an end, where everything, when we start analyzing our experience, is a constant rebirth. We also have faith, by the way, that we have been born. I don't remember that I was born. Does anyone here remember when they were born? This lifetime? I don't think so. We don't even remember what we had for breakfast. So it's all these kind of assumptions. It's the process of delusion, of ignorance, that we keep on fueling, and just believing in what we want to believe rather than actually investigating the nature of reality. So yeah, it's a very coherent system. First and foremost, it's logical. Logical inference is the first thing. I think the first, for someone who's skeptical, like that, you're like, okay, this is worth investigating, and then you can start proving it for yourself as you go.
I might also recommend ask your skeptic friends what they believe. And as you dig a little bit, you'll probably find out that they're not actually skeptics. It's just that they have a belief system that they're clinging very tightly to. So that they might wind up saying something like, oh, they believe in YOLO, as I hear someone was saying. Well, where does that belief come from? What do they believe the mind is? What do they believe consciousness is? Do they believe that there's anything other than physical reality? Or do they think that only physical things are real? That's a very common belief among scientific materialists. They actually have this deep belief that there's only physical reality, and that mind is an illusion derived from physical objects. But that's just a belief. Nobody's ever been able to prove that. And you start running into these issues. It's like, well, what is mind? And physical science runs up against a really difficult problem here, because you simply cannot physically measure a non-physical thing. So your average physical scientist likes to just pretend that the problem isn't there. They just ignore the existence of the mind because it's terribly inconvenient. So that's actually a great question to ask. What do they think the mind is? And where are they getting that belief from?
Yeah, anyway, that's why it's very good come out to be born Buddhist, so you don't have to go through all these trials and tribulations. Siddhanta Sutta is like, poor Westerners. It's so very simple. You have the teachings, you practice them, and that's it.
Yeah, even being born Hindu is a step up, because then at least you already have the concepts of karma and rebirth. A bit different from how it is in Buddhism, but close enough that it's not too big of a jump.
Anyway, Will Val asks, good evening. Where does Pure Land fit in the 31 planes of existence in Buddhist cosmology? Sundasa, would you like to answer that question?
Well, there's a very short and simple answer to this. There's also a much longer and more complicated one, but I'll give the short and simple answer. So the Pure Lands are described, first off, as other worlds. Second, they're defined as worlds where once you are reborn there, you will never fall from that realm until you attain awakening. So in the Theravada Buddhist canon, this is very clearly how the pure abodes are defined, the Suddhavasa. The Suddhavasa are realms where once you're born there, you will never fall from those realms until you attain awakening. So the easiest way to map the Mahayana concept of Pure Land into the Theravada system is to say that they are particular realms within the Suddhavasa, particular pure abode realms. In fact, that's probably why the names are similar. Pure Land, Pure Abode, probably not a coincidence. And I could talk about Pure Land for a long time, but for now I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. And Rick says, I have become aware that I create additional suffering from the very things I feel I need to keep emotionally and physically healthy. For example, my 3 great
Pyrenees, it's a kind of dog, I think.
Dogs, okay.
Yeah.
Are vitally important to me, but caring for them can take a toll on me and my finances. Can you share some reflections on how to find balance? Sumita?
Do you like to talk about
Maybe you take this one.
the stand?
Oh, Stan.
Yeah.
But I don't think I understand the question. Can you rephrase it, Pontin?
So this person is saying that so their attachment to their 3 pet dogs helps them to feel emotionally healthy, but at the same time they recognize that their attachment to those dogs also creates suffering for them. So they're deriving both joy and suffering from their pets.
Yeah, so in short, it's that's the process of ignorance. So before the Buddhist teachings, we've cultivated so many unwholesome habits and without knowledge. So fundamentally, it's very similar to the analogy, actually, I would say, of gardening. So we have both weeds and plants that we like, right? Perhaps we like roses. So we're trying to cultivate rose bushes, and then there's a bunch of weeds. And at the very beginning, the plants kind of all look the same. So we just water everything. And we're like, oh yeah, this is great. Let's grow everything. Then there are certain times that we actually pluck out the roses and we just water the weeds. Sometimes we get it right. So we actually do water the roses and pluck the weeds, but then we get back to watering everything. We get very confused. So it's always a hit or miss. So we have both wholesome things, like Stan, actually the cat. I've known Stan before my Buddhist practice, so I've been actually doing exactly that, watering things both ways. But with the teachings of the Buddha, then we start understanding what is wholesome and what is unwholesome. And attachment is unwholesome. Compassion, caring, loving, metta, that is all wholesome. But yeah, attachment, anxiety, all the different other types of defilements that can come in whenever we care about beings, wanting them to be always the same, is unwholesome. So first and foremost, we identify that, we see, no different than, if we want to start gardening, we need some kind of manual that explains to us, oh, these are maybe an app, there's these like lovely apps now that you take pictures of plants and it tells you whether what type identifies the plant. It's the same with the canon, the Pali Canon. We read the Pali Canon, you're like, oh, that's a defilement. I thought actually righteous indignation was correct, and instead it's not. Oh, I learned something. Oh, there's the righteous indignation. Oh, I see it. Okay, now I uproot it, or I practice with it in a way that it's not there. So yeah, fundamentally that's the goal of practice. So the bad news is that I think that only an enlightened being can love without attachments. It will love without attachments. But there is a process, there's stages of awakening. So we can start by uprooting all the kilesas that we see, and also recollecting the death, actually, of say, for example, pets is very good. I've been recollecting Stan's death now for quite some time, since it's actually probably imminent because his health is dwindling. And yeah, it's very interesting. Before, back in the day, if I was contemplating his death, I would start crying. Now I don't anymore. So there seems to be some more understanding of how things are in the mind. So yeah, practicing. Fundamentally, the answer is how to find balance. Just practice. No excellence can be acquired without constant practice.
I remember when I was in India, when I was in Sri Lanka, in our temple, there were, in the Buddhist temples, we also get lot of refugees, cats and dogs.
Mm.
The stray dogs and cats, they stay in the temple, so we take care of them. There was one dog I was taking care of, and I was, he was very friendly with us, and he would go to the temple when we go for chanting. He would stay there with us all the time. He would be with us, and then suddenly I had to go to India for my studies. And then after 1.5 years, something, I came back to Sri Lanka. I saw the dog dancing with the other dogs in the stupa area, Chaitya, what we call pagoda area. And I suddenly called him, and he came running and jumping and joyfully dancing and barking, running around. I felt, wow, he's so happy now. And I could not even text him, no telephone call, no letter, no email, nothing. But how painful it is, like when you are attached to something or someone, and the more you suffer, right? So the more you are detached, the less you suffer. So I felt after that I should not, take care of the pets unless we can take them with us also whenever we go, wherever we go. Otherwise, it would be difficult. Like you have the suffering thing. That I learned a lesson from that. The more you are attached, the more you suffer. It happens to your children, it happens to your loved one, it happens to your country, it happens to the pets. It can happen even to the plants. You like so much, and suddenly something happened, and then you are heartbroken and you feel sad. So the attachment is important to the point that you don't cry, to the point that you're not heartbroken. Buddha also had attachment. in that case. Like he was always taking care of his parents, he was taking care of his former wives, children, everyone. He was also taking care of rescuing all the family members, all Shakya clan. But that was not, I would call email without attachment. Something you have the attachment, but you're not really attached to the point that you feel sad. So positive attachment, I think, also is important, that we can completely segregate from all the bonds we have. Like as Buddhist monks, we also have, we think of our parents. Buddha said we have to take care of our parents too. So we do that. We think of our family members, we think of our community, we think of our country. But it should not really bother us to the point that when something bad happens to them, we are so sad and so panic. Then there is something negative in that attachment.
Thank you, Bante. And Gregory says, I am not very at peace with myself. I want to get better and be more in control of my thoughts. How do I make this journey towards transcendence? Bante Sumita, would you like to address that?
Could you repeat that?
I'm not very at peace with myself. I want to get better and be more in control of my thoughts. How do I make this journey towards transcendence?
Yes, I think maybe you need to have that that internal dialogue with you. You need to talk to yourself. Sometimes we are so engaged in things outside. We open our eyes, we see a lot of things outside, we forget ourselves. We don't have time to look into ourselves. And then we open our mouth, we talk, and we don't talk to ourselves. Right? We talk with other people, we talk all the gossip or whatever with the other people, but we don't have self-care. We don't have that space, personal space for us. I certainly believe this is a good blessing in disguise for you. Time for you to do a retreat, or time for you to talk to yourself and analyze what's going on, and categorize your emotions, feelings, and wisely, intellectually think of all those things. And then you are the best person to know everything. Maybe certain things you don't even want to share with others, but you definitely can dig into that and see what went wrong. You definitely have the wisdom, and also the confidence. You need to get that confidence in you. If you go to that inward journey, I'm sure you will get that inward that wisdom back, that confidence back, and then you can do something about this. Just to recognize your problem is will be like 50% of your problem solved. So recognize your problem. What is the issue? What is the pain? What is that restlessness or pain or whatever that is disturbing you? And then you can work accordingly. I think that way it will be very helpful. And then if you need some help, talk to some people who are qualified to help you. And all our blessings to you.
Thank you, Bante. And Gregory also asked, as a monk, would you use and promote social media? Do you think being constantly bombarded by information can get in the way of inner peace? Well, actually, we're using social media right now. So this is being live streamed on Facebook. So yeah, as usual, the question is always, what is the intention behind the actions that we do, and how are we using the things that we use? So if it's for the propagation of Dhamma, or for the learning of Dhamma, then it's absolutely great. I think it's actually one of the biggest blessings of this day and age, that you can have so many monastics of also so many different traditions giving teachings online. That's wonderful. Great. That's unprecedented. And this being said, obviously, there's, I know on YouTube, there's recommended other videos, and some are actually in line with what you'd be watching, but some others are a bunch of junk. And yeah, then it's a stream of bombarded of information that can get in the way of inner peace. Absolutely. So that's when you have to practice some self-restraint and yeah, just remember why are you there in the first place and avoid it. And Kumu says there are a few websites devoted only for good news. The content they carry is very uplifting. Oh, great. I did not know. It's good to know. And Sahan says Bhikkhuni needs to dress properly. If you're saying that Bhikkhunis needs to dress properly, I agree. Yes, there's a Vinaya. I practice the Vinaya, and I dress in accordance to the Vinaya. Or if you're telling me that I'm not dressing properly, then you can explain why you think that is not the case, and we can address that. And Jay says, I have a family member suffering with anxiety and depression. How can I skillfully help this person using Buddhism? Svante?
By being kind to them, by being generous and thoughtful and caring to them. But as for trying to get someone to practice Buddhism, that's usually a losing game right from the start. People have to want to practice Buddhism of their own accord. So just show them what it's like having a good Buddhist in their life. So be kind to them, be generous, be caring, be thoughtful, be patient. Listen to them, spend time with them. And they may start to realize that you are modeling a way of living which has less anxiety and depression than the way that they're living. And they may start to get interested and start to ask you what they can do to have to start to get some control over their situation. And that's your opening to start talking about Buddhist practice in more direct terms. But in the beginning, just model your own goodness by really caring for the person and being present for them with all the wholesomeness and warm-heartedness that you can.
Thank you. And Jerry says, in Majjhima Nikaya 61, the Buddha tells us to stop thoughts at the point of wanting to think them and evaluate whether we think it will harm. How do we do this? Are there any prerequisites or co-requisites? Bhante Sumita?
I think Bhante Suddhasa was briefly mentioning about that, how to stop thinking. Like when you go into jhanas, you don't actually generate any thoughts, so that way you actually can stop thinking. And of course, there are also some practices like thinking, practicing like akasananchayatana, looking at the infinite sky. And there are some kasinas that you can practice, and also like looking at the empty space without thinking anything. Also maybe there are some practitioners who do that way. That definitely helps us because that way we do not think of anything, and we also are aware of the situation. And when we don't think of anything, when we don't have any thoughts, that means we do not generate any karma, no sankhara. So that is a really good practice, and you must try. Maybe I can give you, for example, if you want to try this thing, just go to an empty area where you can find some a long tall tree or something, which is not really shaking, and then you can stand maybe 50 feet or 100 feet away and look at that. In between that tree and yourself, just look at that empty space, and no thinking of anything, not about the past, not about the future. Just stay at the present moment and try to focus in that empty space. that will be a great practice for you to stop thinking.
Thank you, Venerable. And Geeta, Kumu, Scott, Jessica, everybody, you're all very kind with your words. We're happy that these teachings are helpful. Amir asks, how can I dissolve the conflict in my mind about my parents as I feel they have been unskillful and neglectful in my upbringing? By understanding that they're not enlightened. So this was actually one of the first realizations that I had in Buddhist practice, because we become more aware of our defilements and how difficult this path is, in a way. And then, at a certain point, you get to understand that your parents are not divine beings. Your parents are no different than yourself. And we just put these really high expectations. I think because when we're young, we see them as these kind of sort of Brahmas, as these omnipotent, omniscient, or, there are all these qualities because they kind of have that, they play that role in our world. And it takes some time to grow out of that, to kind of really see that, well, they're actually impermanent. They only know a few things, and actually maybe even less than what we thought, even less than what we even think they actually know in terms of in a rational way. Yeah, and so why are we expecting them to be enlightened beings? How do we expect them to be, free from greed, hatred, and delusion? So as we see our minds full of greed, hatred, and delusion, as we see how many times we do really harmful stuff, or even when we don't do harmful stuff, harmful thoughts that appear in this mind, the more you practice, you're like, that's disgusting. I can't believe that thought of harming that insect, showed up in my mind, for example. Or how horrible that I actually don't want for that person to be happy. That's such an abstruse thing, abstruse. Like, why would I do that? Why does this thing appear in my mind, right? But become more aware of it if we're honest and truthful. So then, yes, of course, our parents, we should have compassion for our parents. And also that they actually raised us. They tried their best, even in the worst case scenarios. Hardly, anyone puts children in the world and wishes for their harm. It's just that they don't know better. It's what we were talking about earlier about the weeds and the roses. But the motivation is really good. So yeah, that's personally what I've been seeing, and also seeing how my defilements actually in this life. So we have a karmic affinity to our family, to our parents and relatives. So once you start seeing how triggering all their defilements are, if you're a hate type, then you're like, let me see if I actually have these defilements in myself. And the answer that I saw was like, yes. So actually, they're a mirror. So you can also have gratitude because you can see them more clearly in people outside. We're always very sure about how horrible everything else is, how unskillful others are with speech, or how unskillful they are, with words. But sometimes we're a little unaware of how we do the same exact things. So yeah, I think then it's good to get to a stage of forgiveness and of caring and of loving, and yeah. And then working on yourself so that you don't repeat the same patterns.
I remember Venerable Sariputta's story. I highly recommend you read the story of Venerable Sariputta. He was the foremost disciple, foremost among the wise monks, and also the Agga Savaka, the first disciple of the Buddha. And he was so amazing among a liberated, enlightened being. And then it is said, like all his family members, 7 of them, all of them, brothers and sisters, they all became arahants. Venerable Sariputta's siblings, except his mother. His mother still did not follow the path. And it is at the time of his, during the close to his death time, Venerable Sariputta visited his mother. He stayed there. He lived his final days in his mother's home. And the mother saw so many devas coming and going. She actually saw bright lights coming up and down all the time. And one time she saw a very, very, very bright light came. And she asked, "Who's that?" And then Venerable Sariputta mentioned that was the Brahma. Really? Mahabrahma? Did he come to pay respect to you? Yes, that was the Mahabrahma who came to pay respect to me. How wonderful. My son is being respected by even the Mahabrahma. How wonderful. She was so happy, and she started thinking of following the path of the Buddha that time. And also there is a story like one of the former mothers of Venerable Sariputta. She was a hungry ghost, and she wanted to see Venerable Sariputta. And because he was in, I think, Jetavana monastery or something, and somehow because there were so many other powerful devas, she could not enter. And then when she was allowed to come, she said, "I am a former mother of Venerable Sariputta." So Venerable Sariputta helped arrange a charity, a dana, in such a way that she could be rescued from that miserable state. There are beautiful stories like that. It's not only we. There can be so many other people around the world too, and I don't think we have to worry too much about that. First, think of yourself, and maybe you try to impress them. Maybe you try to send them a message that you are doing right, you are doing great, this life is so peaceful and happy, and maybe they will be somehow impressed. Maybe there are some situations where they can really follow the same path as you. So just be um, kind to them, compassionate to them, and just be happy yourself, and be a model, be a role model, be an example, so that they can follow your path somehow, somewhere. It can happen if they are lucky enough.
Thank you, Bante. We also have another question specifically for you. Bante Sumita, do you have any tips to white coat hypertension? The blood pressure goes a little higher in doctor's office, but not at home.
But can you explain the question?
So like when you go to the doctor's office, then your blood pressure is higher? Like maybe because of nervousness or tension or unease?
Mm-hmm. I remember personally, when I go to the doctor, I feel better. Because maybe at home or at the temple, when we have some physical ailment or something, so you really feel suffering, and when you go to the doctor, you feel okay. That actually psychological mostly, because when you go to the doctor, it's how you also feel, like how you have those mental pictures, right? Like when you maybe in your childhood days you had heard these stories, so many experiences. Okay, if you go to the doctor, he will give you injections, and he will do some surgery, and you will have to stay in the hospital for days, and then there will be the medicine and that difficult medical things, and so you have those things haunting in the back of your mind. That is why it can happen to you. Yeah, same thing, like as I mentioned, it can be different for different people. Yeah, just being able to recognize that, I think, will sort out the situation.
Thank you, Venerable. And Shadow of Label has a sci-fi question. What are your thoughts on Luke Skywalker's support of allowing attachment in the new Jedi Order? Is this Star Trek?
It's Star Wars. It's a Star Wars question. But actually, I'm not qualified to answer because I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, great.
I mean, of course, I saw the Star Wars movies years ago, but I don't know what you're talking about. So it's probably from some of the side literature or something. I don't know. Again, I'm a monk. I don't keep up on all the permutations of the Star Wars universe.
I never watched it, so I don't think that Smita knows.
I've heard, but I have never watched. I can't say yes, never.
Yeah, so I can't comment. It is well known that Taoism and Buddhism had some influence on many of the concepts behind Star Wars, but that doesn't mean that they're a reflection of Buddhism. It just means that it had some influence on the creative process.
And Brick says, thank you, Venerables. I rehabilitate highly abused dogs as I offer them love, kindness, compassion, and healing. They offer these same qualities back toward me. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Yes, yes. Yeah, and also when it comes to attachments, I mean, we focus on like, the wholesome things that we're doing. I think we should just focus on the other stuff first. And then when we're close to awakening, we can focus on the other attachments. But yeah, sadhu and madana for all the work that you're doing for all those creatures. That's actually really beautiful. And it's also a teaching of how, by being loving and compassionate towards others, you actually have the magnet for the same. And Stan, I have a similar story too. He was also a rescue cat. Scott says, I have a huge fear of wrongdoing because of the practice. I think it is a bit out of control sometimes. Any advice?
Yeah, recollection of your own goodness. The Buddha said that we should constantly remind ourselves of our own generosity, kindness, compassion. So this helps to counteract that fear of wrongdoing. For one thing, you're developing a lot of wholesome self-esteem, a lot of happy relationship with yourself. And you're also constantly reinforcing your good habits by constantly reminding yourself of your good behaviors and rejoicing in your good behaviors. You strengthen those good behaviors. You make those habits of kindness and compassion and generosity stronger. And that also then builds up your confidence that you'll do the right thing. Builds up your confidence that when faced with temptation, that you'll make wholesome choices, because that's what you're committed to doing and that's what you've been doing. So constantly recollect your own goodness and really affirm your commitment to following the precepts and practicing kindness. Then you'll find that your fear of wrongdoing starts to fade away because you're confident in your own goodness.
Thank you, Ramtin. And Spike Girls says, I've been involved in nonviolent protests in Canada to protect the last old-growth rainforest. Can Buddhism intersect with civil disobedience as we're saving the forest for all sentient beings? Absolutely, actually. The nonviolent being the key. So for more information, actually, I highly recommend you research the forest monks in Thailand, Cambodia, and Southeast Asia in general, who actually for the past decades have been doing a lot of nonviolent protests because of the extreme destruction of the forest, and them being forest dwellers. Actually, they've been some of the at the forefront of the protests, or of the, how do you say, salvaguardia, like safety, like of the forest. Safeguarding, thank you. Safeguarding of the forest. Actually, Ajahn Pasando, who is a Western monk, also was involved in all of those protests, but like really full of Dhamma. So not just complaining and saying, oh, stop doing that, but actually really also sharing Dhamma principles also with the local populations that are in the proximity of the forests, and empowering them to understand the resources that the forest has, rather than just using them for the sort of immediate kind of thing that they can see for their needs. Anyway, if you research it, it's a very long kind of subject matter, but yeah, highly recommended.
I remember some Thai forest monks, they used to
Ordain the trees.
ordain the trees.
Yeah.
So where people, even those forest people who are actually clearing the jungles, they would still have some respect to the robe. So they do not cut those big trees. So the monks would, what do you call it, cover it, wear it with the robe. That's pretty amazing practice. Like how much like respect you have towards the nature, how important it is for us to survive in this earth with the grace of the trees. It's really important. Yeah, so that's a very harmless way of, peaceful way of preserving the nature.
Thank you. And Alex asks, traditionally, the Abhidhamma is said to have been taught by the Buddha in the Tusita heaven. Scholarship says Abhidhamma comes from much later. How do we balance scholarship with tradition?
Because it's asking the wrong question. The right question to ask is, does it help you make progress on the path? So if studying Abhidhamma helps you to develop wholesome mind states and diminish your unwholesome states, then it's good. You can study Abhidhamma. But if studying Abhidhamma does not help you, then maybe you're better off studying the suttas. So I personally, I've done some Abhidhamma studies and it wasn't really my thing. So I mostly focus on studying the suttas instead. But there's some people who they study the Abhidhamma and they find it's really helpful for them. So it doesn't really matter so much whether the Abhidhamma was something the Buddha taught to devas in the Tusita heaven or whether it was a composition by later scholar monks. It doesn't really matter. What matters is it helpful to you? That's the important question.
Thank you, Bante. And Chris asks, hello, Venerables, do you or monks in general read Dharma books written by lay teachers? Have any of you read Seeing That Freeze by Rob Bourbea? So I'll reply for myself. No. And no. I don't know who Rob Bourbea is. I've always been pretty obsessed with monastics before. That's why I became one of them. So the only like Western lay teacher that I found Dharma books interesting from are from the late Rita Gross, who she died actually right before we started Buddhist Insights, unfortunately, and she was a disciple of Her Holiness Kandro Rinpoche, a Tibetan bhikkhuni, I don't know if she's a bhikkhuni, but Tibetan teacher, monastic. And I would say lay teachers, usually if they're Asian Buddhists, then like Piatan, I think, is a
lay teacher.
A lay teacher.
He was a former monk.
Former monk.
Oh, he was a former monk.
Okay.
So
okay.
see, that's my karma. I did not know, but I find his teachings very interesting, or his Dharma books. I don't know if they're books really, but Dharma articles, yes. So that would be my answer. So, but apparently he was a monk.
Yeah,
so
he was
like,
a monk before.
So I guess lay teachers who were monks before maybe. And Bante Sumita, maybe you want to answer as well.
I think what matters is the content. Even if the monk doesn't write the right thing, then you don't have to read. And the Buddha said in Kalama Sutta, in Kalama Sutta, whether it was written by a very famous monk or whether it is very popular or whether it is whatever, so you have a lot of likes or a lot of followers, it doesn't really matter. What's important is, does it convince you, as Bhante Sudaso mentioned just before, does it make sense to you? if you read. Even if a lay people, I think if they write good books, why not? Why not? We read if it helps, right? So yeah, I don't think it is not the question that we need to ask. What is important for us is to whether it helps us to go closer to the nibbana. And if it is helpful, I don't mind reading any of lay teachers or whatever books.
Thank you, Bante. And Power of Love says, could you share some insights to the different translations of Nama? I've seen it translated as name and as mind. Nanavira in notes on Dhamma seems to state mind is inaccurate. I would recommend actually asking this question to Ajahn Punadhammo, who will be going through all the steps of dependent origination, which is kind of the subject of the month. So we'll be talking a lot about all of that. So Ajahn Punadhammo will be starting on Wednesday, and actually Bhante Sumita, the week after that, will also be giving 3 talks, one after the other, on the subject matter. So very good opportunities. And Pial, you're very, very kind with your message. Pial also has a question that I'll pass to Bhante Sudaso. In the Dhamma Chakra Sutta, Buddha only gives examples of suffering. Only in the last sentence he says, in summary, cling to 5 aggregates is suffering. However, no mechanism of clinging are explicitly discussed. My question is in reference to dependent origination. Can you say it is an expansion of the First Noble Truth in detail? Is it regarded as generation of entire mass of suffering?
I mean, more precisely, dependent origination is an explanation of the second noble truth, which is how suffering arises, how it comes into being. But yeah, I mean, dependent origination, it's an expansion on the Four Noble Truths. But then technically every single thing the Buddha ever taught was an expansion on the Four Noble Truths. So it's not really saying too much. But yeah, properly speaking, dependent origination is an explanation, an expansion of the second and third noble truths. Yeah.
And Roland asks, how do we know if our suffering is due to past karma? What do we do when the bad seeds of past karma begin to ripen? How do we live in samsara? Well, as the Buddha recommends to do, is not dwelling too much in the past into speculation of who I was in the past, or who am I now, where will I be in the future, blah, 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 but rather always going back to, this is suffering. So you're experiencing suffering. What is the cause of suffering? The cause of suffering is desire. There is a way out of suffering, and there's also how to get out of suffering, which is the Noble Eightfold Path. So just practice the Noble Eightfold Path and you'll be all right. And the last question, maybe that was, oh, here it is. Are you, something. Are you monks vaccinated, and would the Buddha have agreed? Yes and yes. Okay, maybe last question actually from Pia. This is another follow-up question from last night. It was mentioned yesterday that there are some suttas on dependent origination, starting point other than ignorance. In my search, I could not find any so for other than Sammaditthi suttas, which I mentioned yesterday. Can you recall some of these factors, or if not, can you kindly share the references of the sutta when you have time?
I definitely don't have time right now. So I think that we'll need to wait for one of the other talks on the subject.
Yes, actually, we can do a subject, one of the subjects on that in particular of all the different suttas. So I'm currently curating that, so it will be on the list. All right, great. So that was all for this evening. Thank you all for joining us. Next week, we will have a special monk chat with Ajahn Prasanna, who will be answering questions from other monastics. So if you are a monastic and you want to join the live, send us an email. And also, if there's time, we will also be answering questions from lay people. So you'll be coming here and seeing a few different monastics asking questions to Ajahn Prasanna, who's a very senior monk. And we're very grateful for that. And next week, as usual, there will be the live streams at 8 a.m. and 7:30 p.m. New York City time, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And Bhakti Sumita will be, it's not actually next week.
Next week is
next week it will be Ayavi Malanyani, who will be sharing 3 teachings, I believe, on Sumedha, the Bhikkhuni Sumedha. And then there will be on Wednesday morning Shifu Simplicity's last session on the Mahayana teachings, and in the evening Ajahn Punadamo giving his first
Are we not having the retreat?
We will be on retreat, but they won't.
Okay. Okay.
All right. So may you all be well and happy. And end with 3 sadhus.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.